Hey guys, RanterInShades here, exercise my first to memorize vlog style, and if you'll remember in my Death to False Metal video, Suck video, you'll remember I said the following. And on the topic of mainstream music, aren't Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Metallica, etc. pretty mainstream of bands? We'll explore that when I make a word analysis about the word mainstream. Here we are today with a word analysis, and yes indeed, this is going to be about the word mainstream, and how it's chucked around so goddamn much. Already I hate it when hipster douches complain and say they hate everything mainstream. Now of course the word everything tends to be an exaggeration, but you get what I mean. And in the Death to False Metal video, I explained the basics for my problem with the overuse of the word mainstream. It feels like there are way too many definitions of mainstream, to the point where I don't even think these people know what they're talking about. Let's talk about an artist that's popular today. How about Bruno Mars? He's a guy I like for the most part. He's had some chart-topping hits, and is undeniably very popular amongst this generation. By that default, he would be what you would call a mainstream artist. What about an older band that was popular in their heyday? For this, let's use a personal favorite of mine, Extreme. I love this band. Nuno Bettencourt is a phenomenal guitarist, who I view as an influence of mine, musically, and the band's first 3 albums are very well made and well written of albums, and I would regard them as classics, even. Unfortunately, Extreme was given a blessing in disguise by having a #1 hit with an acoustic ballad. While it made the band household names back in the early 90s, they weren't really getting top billing throughout the rest of the 90s. But let's talk about today. Would Extreme be considered a mainstream band? Mainstream on the level Bruno Mars is today? From around 1989 to 1992, I'd say so, but in 2014? No, let's not kid ourselves. And of course, there are many bands and artists from previous decades that are still very successful to this day. The bands on my posters back here, with the exception of maybe Poison, are all good examples of bands that still reach a wide audience and do well sales-wise. Are they mainstream? Yes. Modern underground bands I shouldn't have to explain. All over the world, there are plenitudes of bands and artists that don't sell huge numbers, a few of which I'm somewhat friendly with. An example of that would be a hardcore band from over in Yonkers called Sawmill. The singer from that band goes to my school here, and we're good friends. Are they a mainstream band? Unfortunately not. Would it be cool if they were? Totally. And if that happens, I'm not going to be one of those douchebags to whine and cry about them selling out just because they're reaching a wider audience, which is another word analysis for another day. The point I'm trying to make is that while certain bands from certain time periods are or were mainstream, they aren't exactly on the same level of popularity that someone like Bruno Mars is today. So with the example that I made of Extreme, it doesn't make much sense to still consider them a mainstream band since they aren't platinum sellers in 2014. It's not 1990. Another thing that has to do with the label mainstream that I hate is when people call bands like Fallen in Reverse or Attila, 2 bands I really do not care for, really popular bands. Are they popular amongst the metal scene? Yeah, but be honest with me. Are they on the same level of popularity as your Katy Perrys or your One Directions? No. They aren't topping the charts, their singles aren't going to #1, and you're not hearing them on hit radio. So why treat them as if they are? Same with the people who like to bitch about nu metal being commercial in this day and age. Maybe if it were 2000 you'd have a point, but it's not 2000 anymore. While there are some nu metal bands that can still sell out a stadium like Korn or Slipknot, am I gonna act like that's the case for bands like Nonpoint, Spineshank, Rev Theory, and Soil? As much as I do like those bands, the unfortunate reality is that it isn't the case. But at the end of the day, one of the biggest questions I can ask is, who cares how mainstream a band is if the music's good? The Red Hot Chili Peppers, by the standards I've explained, is a mainstream band, but are they good? Yeah! Just because a band is popular or mainstream doesn't mean they make terrible music. If they make good music, which, you know, is subjective, why should it matter how popular they are? Especially if you're one of those people that says they hate everything mainstream like I referenced earlier. If you bash mainstream music and then listen to a band like Megadeth, to me it seems more like a double standard than you making an exception. I made a video about this called Metal Elitists Exceptions, basically explaining this. If you enjoy a mainstream band like Megadeth or any other band around that level of popularity, then by that logic, you don't really hate mainstream music. And justifying it by saying it isn't on the popularity level of hit radio music doesn't really help your case. It doesn't make Megadeth sound like an underground band. If this is just an issue with certain bands or certain genres of music, don't generalize and say that it's an issue with mainstream music in general, because a lot more bands and artists fit the standards of what makes a band mainstream than you think. Maybe not to the point where they're being played on the same radio station as Taylor Swift, and they're at her level of popularity, but still technically mainstream. So those core bands that everyone loves to complain about, are they mainstream? Yes. But far too often, like I said before, people like metal elitists exaggerate their popularity, and that's retarded. And they'll do the same thing with bands like Extreme or White Lion, complain and exaggerate their popularity when they haven't been huge for years. I guess they're popular in the sense that their music still reaches an audience, but is it a 2014 hit radio top of the charts audience? No. That isn't what I would call a mainstream band in 2014. There is no shame at all in enjoying mainstream music. If you like it, awesome. If you don't, awesome. All I'm really saying is that it makes for a really lame reason to not like a band just because other people like them? Thus concludes this word analysis and my thoughts here. What do you guys think? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Take care and have a nice day. I'm Shades, and I'll see you next time.